Hello and welcome to AP World History. Today we are going to cover our second PowerPoint, Classical Civilizations in Early China. Essentially this means that we're going to be talking about prior to 1200 CE. That's what we mean when we say the Classical era. So essentially the Classical era goes from about 600 CE, so after 600 CE, to about 1250, 1200 CE, so in that 600-year time span. And we're going to have to do a little bit of background information to go into ancient China. So the ancient dynasties that formed, including the Zhou and the Qin dynasties, before moving on to the more relatively modern Han dynasties, or Han dynasty, singular, that rules after the year 0. So we get more into the Common Era. The PowerPoint. Now the Cornell notes do not have the pictures, and so that may be of interest of you. If you are trying to make picture notes, then feel free to take screenshots to incorporate that into your notes, because things like this are much easier to understand when they're seen rather than heard. So you are going to have to know about these major classical trade routes when we talk about AP World History. The one that we're going to be focusing on today is the one in red. That deals with the Silk Roads. Okay, the Silk Roads were incredibly important for cultural diffusion through trade, but what's interesting about them is that it wasn't an actual road. It wasn't a physical road that was paved and laid out and everyone said, oh yeah, that's like McGee Road or, Eastern Boulevard. No, it's a metaphorical road. Okay, it doesn't actually exist. It's an idea. So it's more so a number of routes, okay, that has been taken from the east to the west and from the west to the east. It's not an actual physical road that you could travel down. It is a route, and it can move. It can move like further north, it can move further south based on wars that are happening or bad weather that's happening. It's basically, I just want to get into that idea of it is not a physical road, it is a trade route. These are some early civilization and empires that came prior to the classical era, the post-classical era. So, for instance, we're going to talk about the Qin and the Han dynasty today, even though our curriculum for the AP exam pretty much starts off more with the Tang and the Song, well, a little bit with the Sei dynasty as well. So this is, again, context. This is background information. Do we learn about Teotihuacan or the Mayans or the Romans or the Greeks or the Qin dynasty anymore for the AP exam? No. Okay, unfortunately we don't get to cover those empires because they are no longer a part of the curriculum. But it is important to know of them and to be at least rudimentarily familiar with them if you're going to want to do well on the AP exam, because they build the foundation for what we're going to learn in PowerPoint 3. So classical China includes the Qin and the Han dynasties. But before the Qin and the Han, we have the Zhou dynasty. So you may note that the way that we would spell these versus pronounce them in terms of the English language is a little bit different. Okay, so the Zhou dynasty is spelled Z-H-O-U, and they ruled from 1046 BCE, meaning before the Common Era, so before the year 0, to 256 BCE. So we still are not in the Common Era yet with the Zhou dynasty, so we're not going to talk about them as much. The Qin dynasty, still about 200 years away from the year 0. So this is also very early China, and you'll note that the Qin dynasty didn't last very long. It lasted approximately one person, because the Qin emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, was so hated because he was so strict and basically just, brutal in his enforcement of legalism, which we talked about in our last PowerPoint, and we're going to talk about again in this PowerPoint. Finally, with the Han dynasty, that's when we see us moving into the Common Era. The year 0 is somewhere in the middle between 202 BCE and 220 CE. And this is going to be a period of lasting peace, or the Pax Sinica, which we're going to talk about later in this PowerPoint as well. So in terms of Chinese society, religion, and gender roles, you're going to see that Confucianism has a major effect on society. It is the most important, longest lasting continuity in Chinese history. You cannot talk about China without talking about Confucianism. That's how important it is. It taught the importance of respecting social hierarchies, meaning the people on top are supposed to be on top. That's their job, that's their role. The people on bottom are supposed to be on bottom. That's their job, that's their role. And if we want society to be peaceful, then we all got to stay in our lanes. So you should respect things the way they are. Don't try to change. Okay, so in the same thread, a good government consists in the ruler being a ruler, the minister being a minister, the father being the father, and the son being the son. If you're the son, don't go around sassing your dad, telling him what to do like you pay the bills around here. Okay, that is not the role under Confucianism. Family is very, very important in Chinese society, although it is going to be patriarchal, meaning the male dominates. That's what patriarchal means. It means that the men dominate society and hold high positions in society compared to women. A matriarchal society would be the opposite, in which it's the other way around. The father is the head of the household. He arranges the marriages, chooses the education and career of his male children, and arranges the marriages of his female children as well as his male children, and that's all under the Chinese idea of filial piety. Okay, you are subservient to the male head of the household. That is your role. In this role, women have very few rights. They're not usually going to be educated, and they are mostly filling the role of a servant, especially the younger they are. The older you are, you get a little bit more clout, but not so much when you're a young wife. Taoism is going to help. Taoism is going to help promote gender equality, but as you know, it is not the dominant philosophy in China. Remember that Confucianism and Taoism are not religions; they are philosophies. And this is going to promote gender equality because you have to have both genders in harmony. Okay, as you can see, the yin and the yang, one is feminine and the other is masculine, but they're in equal levels. Again, we don't really see that implemented as much. So now we've done a little bit of background on the philosophies that were dominant during this time. Let's talk about the first dynasty of China. The Zhou dynasty is going to rule China for over 800 years. This is the longest lasting dynasty in Chinese history. They conquered the Shang dynasty, which was for a long time considered a mythological Chinese dynasty. Like there wasn't a lot of proof that it actually existed because, historical records weren't very clear from that period of time. Remember, it's all before the year 0, very, very long time ago. But the thing that you need to remember about this is that the Zhou dynasty overthrew the Shang dynasty because they claimed rule under the mandate of heaven. Now, what is the mandate of heaven? In Chinese society, under Confucianism at this time, you're not supposed to rebel, right? You're supposed to follow the leader. Well, who gives the leader the right to rule? Not the people. He's not democratically elected. The thing that gives the ruler the right to be in charge is that he is given that right by the gods. Okay? The animistic religion, okay, the gods and the ancestors chose who was supposed to be in charge. And how do we know who's supposed to be in charge after that ruler dies? Well, it goes to that ruler's eldest son because the gods gave him that eldest son. So basically the mandate of heaven is saying that the king or the emperor rules due to the will of the gods. Now, when things are going really well in China, like there's plenty of food and the harvests are good and there's peace in the empire, then the ruler gets credit for that. The gods are smiling upon the emperor. The gods are keeping things nice and peaceful and stable because the ruler has the mandate of heaven. But what about when it starts flooding? What about when your crops get trampled in a war because of invasions and people are starving or there's not enough work? Well, then who gets blamed? That's right, the leader. The gods must be punishing the emperor because the emperor lost the mandate of heaven. So, really, with the mandate of heaven, on one hand, you have it strengthening the government by saying the gods want this ruler in charge, and who are you to go up against a god? But on the other hand, it also gives the people in the society the right to rebel if their ruler loses that mandate. So, as long as things are going well, there's plenty of food, there's no famines, there's no war, then people just assume that the gods like the emperor. As soon as things turn bad and there's famines and war and floods and whatnot, that's when the people decide, God must be punishing us. How do we appease the gods? Let's overthrow the emperor and start a new dynasty. Okay, so the Zhou dynasty is going to come to power using that mandate of heaven. They're going to claim, hey, things are getting pretty bad around here. The Shang dynasty, the emperor must have lost that mandate. We have the right, according to that mandate, to come in, overthrow them, and establish our own dynasty. And under this dynasty, you're going to see the formation of feudalism. 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 To control their land, the kings give land to some nobles. The nobles then work peasants on that land. So the king holds, or the emperor holds, all the land and gives some of that land to his best buddies, the nobles. In exchange, the nobles are supposed to provide soldiers and an army for the king. The nobles then in turn go to the peasants and say, hey, you want a place to live and a job and a food every night? Well, then you come for work for me on my land doing agricultural labor. Okay, so it's a feudalistic system. The kings are going to give their best buddies or their relatives, cousins, aunties, whatever, city-states to rule over as long as they report back to the king. Each of these lords is going to control that city, and they're going to start developing their own and building their own armies, which is going to be a very, very bad thing for the kings, because what you don't want to happen is to have a bunch of people in your kingdom with their own personal armies that they're paying for, because then they could use that army against you. And that's how the lords eventually end up getting and amassing such a large army that they're able to overthrow the emperor. So the Zhou dynasty, not going to be particularly peaceful because it is very decentralized. You don't have central power in one ruler because that one ruler gave away a bunch of land to people who started building their own armies. So these city-states are often going to fight one another, and that constant conflict is going to undermine the Zhou dynasty, eventually leading to the end of this 800-year-long empire. But it wasn't all bad. Some of the technological advances of the Zhou dynasty included the building of roads, so that's going to help with trade along the Silk Road. It's going to help expand their foreign trade, which means they're able to export, meaning sell goods, as well as import, meaning buy goods. They are going to, revolutionize their military by forming cavalries, where instead of having foot soldiers charge at each other and fight, they're going to have men on horseback. That gives them a tactical advantage as they can move faster than a foot soldier and they are at a higher height. And so you're going to see that this is also going to be spread amongst the Mongols, who we'll talk about later. A new weapon is going to be created, the crossbow. Obviously that's beneficial because it can send an arrow to shoot faster and with less effort. Also iron plows. Now that's not going to be for fighting, that's going to be for agriculture. That helps to till the earth, and if it's made of iron, that means it's easier to till the earth, which means it's easier to farm, which means more food. What does more food equal? More people. Okay, because the more food you have, that means fewer people die of starvation. More people live long enough to get old enough to have babies. So better agricultural technology equals a larger population due to the increase in food. Irrigation deals with controlling the path of water. So you're going to have irrigation that helps move water to fields, which is an agricultural innovation, and also flood control systems. So irrigation helps get water where you want it to go, and flood control systems help move water away from places where you wouldn't want water to go. All right, so as we said before, due to the agricultural advances, you're going to see an increase in food. Increase in food means longer lives. Longer lives means more babies. You're going to see that the Zhou dynasty ends due to the Qin dynasty. So all of that fighting that was caused amongst the different city-states of ancient China is going to allow for Qin Shi Huangdi to rise to power as the quote-unquote first emperor. Okay, so that's where we get the title, the Qin dynasty, from the name Qin Shi Huangdi. Now he's going to be known for a lot of notable things. He is going to build the Great Wall using forced labor. He is going to bury some people alive because he focuses on legalism. He believes that humans are naturally bad and that they need to conform, and that he is going to force that conversion. So help me, I'm not going to lose the mandate of heaven sort of idea. And also, interestingly enough, although this isn't going to be something that you find on a test or a quiz, he tried to find the elixir to eternal life. And one of the things that he tried in order to live forever was drinking mercury. Now, I don't know if you know much about mercury, but I'm sure you've heard of a little thing called mercury poisoning. So yeah, it turns out that drinking poison was not the secret to an everlasting life. Who knew? So he is going to unite much of the nation under one strong government. That means that the government is centralized. If a government or a empire has one ruler who holds most of the power, and there's a system of authority under it, then that's going to be a centralized empire. Decentralized is when you have a bunch of different city-states fighting each other for power, instead of having one ruler who rules them all. He's going to organize the empire into military districts where he places one official in charge over a district, and then that official reports back directly to him, the emperor. He is going to codify the system of weights and measures. So that means that no matter where you go in China, an ounce is an ounce, an inch is an inch, although it probably make more sense for it to be the metric system than the American system, since the whole world uses that. So a universal system of weights and measures, so that you know no matter where you go, this is going to weigh the same amount. He's also going to standardize the coins, create a uniform writing system, which is going to help with the spread of information, and set up a law code, i.e. legalism, throughout China. So while all of that sounds very good, some of the negatives of Shi Huangdi's rule includes that he used forced labor to dig canals and to build roads, most notably in the building of his Great Wall. Here you see his terracotta army. When he died, he had a very, very elaborate tomb created for himself, which included individualized terracotta soldiers that were buried with him. Each one has its own unique face. So it wasn't like they made a copy of one person over and over and over again and just threw them in the tomb with him. They actually made individual statues to protect him in the afterlife. And he also had, not lakes, rivers of mercury flowing through the tomb. Just another throwback to his ironic elixir of life. So here you see the most of his tomb, where you can see more of the terracotta soldiers. And here's the main area where he would be buried. If you like, you can watch this video. I will post it in the page that you saw. In the interest of just moving along, though, I'm going to go ahead and move along with the lecture. So if you want to watch this video, pause here, and then go find the video, open it, and watch it. So the Great Wall of China was built by Qin Shi Huangdi through forced labor. In fact, many people are going to die building that wall, and the purpose of it was to prevent attacks from the north. Okay, now this wall wasn't just started in one day and then it's like, oh, here's a wall. There were already a bunch of walls throughout northern China, and all they did was pretty much connect the walls that were already in existence. Now, this did take several years. It wasn't, just a 1 year project and then whoop, it's done. All right, it's over 4,000 miles long, so of course it's going to take an extended period of time, and it's going to take over 250,000 peasants helping to build that wall, and many of them are going to die in the building of that wall. In fact, in building this wall, they're going to just deal with dead bodies by throwing them in and continuing to lay bricks. So you can look up how there are still bodies in the foundations of the walls as people would die building the different parts of the wall, and people would say, well, rather than sending them back home or shipping their body back home, let's just throw them in and just keep going. And it's so extensive, 4,000 miles long, that it can actually be seen from space. So Qin is not going to be particularly popular with the Chinese people because he is so strict. That strict rule that he follows is legalism. He is going to impose a tax on landowners, and people typically don't like being taxed. He is going to appoint educated people as officials in his government, but everyone else, they only have two options. They can either be a farmer or a soldier. Okay, not a lot of need for book smarts in the Qin dynasty, because you're supposed to be a soldier or a farmer, and that's it. No room for book learning for the regular citizen, because reading leads to ideas, and some ideas might lead to overthrowing the government, and we can't have that. And so in the interest of maintaining rule, Shi Huangdi censors information. He tries to limit the spread of education and information, and he burns books in order to rewrite history in a way that frames it as more beneficial for him. Okay, so he told people, don't write about the past. Okay, don't talk about how good things used to be. Okay, because if you talk about how good things used to be, then you're more likely to want to overthrow the ruler who's currently in charge. So he said, you're not allowed to write about the past, about what happened prior to the Qin dynasty. No more talking about the Zhou dynasty and how great things were back then. I'm great. This time is great. That's what you should be writing about. And if your book isn't about how great I am and about how great my dynasty is, then guess what? It's going into the fire. So legalism are basically scholars that opposed Confucian ideas about society. The idea that, in order to maintain harmony in society, we just have to follow 5 essential roles and everything will be good. No, that assumes too much about human behavior in that it makes it sound too positive. Legalists believe that humans are naturally bad and that humans need to be controlled, or otherwise their animal instincts will take over and society will become anarchy. So legalists were basically like, we live in a society. So this philosophy rejected the idea of learning by example and the golden rule, and instead focused very heavily on behavior, strict laws, and harsh punishments if you broke those laws. And so as a result, the subjects are going to see Qin as kind of a jerk, and they're going to want to get rid of him. The nobles were upset because he destroyed the aristocracy in order to claim power for himself by taxing the landowners. The peasants are going to be mad about being forced to build a wall and dying in the process. And the scholars are going to be mad about the book burning and also the fact that he killed a lot of scholars in the interest of maintaining his rule, including burying them alive or burning them alive with the books. So yeah, not exactly the best guy around. So in 210 BCE, when Shi Huangdi died, his dynasty died with him. After he died, his subjects weren't interested in, hey, let's give his son a chance to rule and see if he's any different. No, they straight up said, nope, lost the mandate of heaven. The Qin dynasty is over. We're going to move on to the Han dynasty. But the lasting legacy, or the lasting effect of Shi Huangdi's rule in the Qin dynasty, is that there were new uniform ways of organizing the country through their writing system and their system of universal weights and measurements, and in unifying the nation. And so this is where we're going to move into the glorious Han. So I'm going to pause this recording here to break it up and start off with a new recording from this lecture.